Good morning, everyone. It's really nice to be here. And I consider it one of the great triumphs of my life that I can stand here today and think I'm quite attractive and say that. Even my not so good days now are more in the realms of what I would say the average woman probably experiences. So when my skin doesn't look so great, or I can't get my hair right, like today because I didn't get up in time, but I'm actually still standing here with it kind of flopping in my face a bit. And there's nothing really now that comes close to the anguish I used to experience. So when I was 19, I wrote in my diary that I looked like an ugly middle-aged man. And that was really what I thought about myself. It was always my face that was the problem, mainly my eye and nose area, so kind of this. I really thought I was truly hideous, and it was an obsession that absorbed most of my waking minutes and caused me a great deal of distress. A strange problem for me was that I was always tall and slim, and I sort of had this figure that was considered conventionally attractive, and I'd always get a lot of compliments about that, but all I ever heard when people said that was, they must think my face is really ugly. My appearance anxieties had really kicked off earlier in my teens. I had one of those toxic friendships that seem fairly common in teen years among girls in particular. And I had this girl at school who missed no opportunity to tell me how ugly she thought I was. But she did it in a really kind of insidious way. So she'd slide these comments under my skin. She'd sort of say, oh, you look just like such and such a celebrity. And then the next day she'd say, that celebrity is really ugly. So it was kind of drip-fed into me for years. Or she'd do awful things like pretend a boy fancied me and then laugh at me for thinking anyone could ever find me attractive. And over the years, it really wore down my self-esteem. And the girl in question was actually very pretty as well, so I'd compare my appearance to hers and think how awful I looked in comparison and just feel completely hopeless, really. I think I knew at the time how damaging it all was, but I just couldn't access the help I needed to stop it. I didn't have many other friends at school and none that I could really talk to openly. And my parents had their own problems and I think just couldn't really cope with hearing how unhappy I was. But actually now looking back on it and having done a lot of work on myself, I realise it wasn't just about school bullying. I mean, that was definitely a trigger. But my parents were extremely anxious. And so the anxiety, I think, was already there, modelled by them. And I remember having insomnia over a maths puzzle when I was 7 and bit my nails right down to the cuticles. So that I think the ground was already laid. And when I got bullied at school, that just shaped the direction it went in. That's the way I think of it now anyway. And also I come from a family in which good looks were highly prized. And everyone always focused a lot on appearance when I was growing up. You know, all the girls in the family were always told how pretty they were and not really anything else. And I think that probably also focused it that way. As I got a bit older, into my late teens, my anxiety soared. I sometimes reached the point of paralysis and found it hard to leave the house. I'd stay in, staring at my hideous face, self-harming with razor blades. That was a big thing for me. That was a coping mechanism. And when I went out, I tried to flatten my anxiety with copious amounts of alcohol, sometimes drugs, which obviously all came with its own problems, not least making me even more anxious, although I didn't make the connection at the time. And I also began to spend a lot of money on makeup. And I mean a lot. And I was a student at this point, so I'd obsess over the idea that a certain makeup item was going to be the one thing that would make me look okay, and then I'd go and buy it, and I'd put it on. And of course, it wasn't this magic thing that made me look okay at all. And then I ended up with a stockpile of very expensive lipsticks and eyeliners and concealers, and as a mountain of debt. I left university in so much debt, and it wasn't even just because of loans and things. It was my makeup habit, which I never told anyone about. I was really deeply ashamed of that. I used to kind of hide this pile of makeup in my room. Relationships were a particularly difficult area for me as well. And in fact, I was reading some of the stories on the BDD Foundation website, and I saw that wasn't an uncommon thing. It's not surprising. I just found it impossible to believe anyone would be attracted to me. And when someone was, I just couldn't really believe it. I thought, oh, maybe they just like my body and just can't bear to look at my face. When I had rejections, which everyone gets, of course, I would immediately blame my appearance, which made everything much more upsetting even than it would have been. And with hindsight, I can see I missed a lot of opportunities over the years to have good relationships because I just didn't pick up on the signals that someone liked me, or I'd sabotage the relationship by being very needy for reassurance all the time. Actually, reassurance seeking was also one of my big coping tactics. I did it all the time with friends and family alike. Usually when I was drunk. I'm amazed anyone ever invited me to a party because really I wasn't much fun. People would often tell me I was good looking, and sometimes not even prompted by me, but it made absolutely zero difference. It was like throwing a flower into a big canyon. It didn't touch the sides at all. As I moved into my 20s, my anxiety worsened. I had serious health anxiety, actually, at the same time. But I still didn't realise what I was dealing with. I just thought that I really was ugly. I didn't realise I had a psychiatric problem. And then one day, as Rob was just saying, a lot of people do seem to find out what BDD is and that they might have it through reading things in the media. And I read a feature in a magazine about a woman with BDD, and I just thought, that's me, that's exactly me. And that was the first time it had ever occurred to me that my real problem might be a mental health condition and not actually my face. And that was such an important first step. I didn't take action straight away, but that definitely planted a seed. And over the next few years, I did seek help at various points. Unfortunately, I didn't get it, or I didn't get the right help. I was referred to psychiatrists on a couple of occasions, but I didn't get a BDD diagnosis. I think they both sent me away saying I just had a lot of hang-ups that I needed to work on, which really wasn't very helpful. And, I think it's true for any mental health condition that you really have to persevere to get the right help, sadly. But unfortunately, the problem is you're often in such a low state and so vulnerable that it's really hard to do that. And I think both times that happened with the psychiatrist, I just went away feeling completely defeated and, didn't manage to get to seek help again for a while. And I do feel sad thinking about that because it could have saved me a few years of not being well. But anyway, that was the way it was. I think by my late 20s, I'd got to a point where I realised the drinking was really becoming a problem in itself. So I cut down on that. That was a really important step. But of course, without the alcohol, or without that much alcohol to paper over my anxiety, that got worse. I began to look into plastic surgery, and I was spending more time than ever looking in the mirror and still buying loads of makeup all the time. And I then ended up happening to talk to a really understanding GP who kind of had a bit of an idea, I think, about what might be going on. Well, I don't know if he knew about BDD, but I think he probably recognised that there was some kind of anxiety disorder, and he prescribed antidepressants, which weren't the complete answer, but definitely took the edge off my anxiety a bit and probably kind of lifted me to a point where I could start to think about seeking proper help. I read Catherine Phillips' book, The Broken Mirror, which was just mentioned, and then I read about Professor Veal and made an appointment to see him. It was such a relief to get that diagnosis, and I remember crying when I got the letter about it, just thinking, finally, yes, this is what this feels right. This is what I need help with. And I had several sessions of therapy, which really moved me on a lot. I think mainly helping me take a step back from my thoughts about my face and recognising them for what they really were, symptoms of an anxiety disorder, not actually a problem with my face. It's very hard to get my head around that, but I I did eventually do it. And I started to understand how much time obsessing about my appearance was really taking up. Learnt about why reassurance seeking doesn't work, and began to stop myself from doing that, which was easier said than done, but even reducing it was a big step. And then I carried on with CBT with a practitioner closer to where I lived, and I went to a few meetings of a BDD self-help group. And I think for me, one of the main things I got from that was just to see that everyone looked, at the very least, completely fine, and I couldn't see why they had issues at all. And so I suppose that was good for me as well, because it made me think perhaps that's the same for someone looking outside at me. So that time was transformative and really put me on the road to recovery, but there was still a long way to go. I still struggled with low self-esteem about my appearance, although, I mean, I think, you know, the volume was really turned down, but I still didn't feel good about it. And I started to look for other ways to help myself, really. And gradually, I've worked out what supports me. So for me, that tends to be things that keep me around other people and not spending too much time on my own. So it's all about looking outward and just focusing on things other than my looks. So I've built up general self-esteem, exercise. Still probably don't do enough, but that has been a really important thing for me. And spending time with good friends and hobbies, having hobbies that I enjoy, that absorb me, all that stuff. Trying to see where I can help others as well, that's quite an important thing for me. Not with BDD necessarily, but just generally in my community. And this year I've tried a little experiment to compliment other women on their appearance. So I'm a journalist, and I wrote about that for a website, and it had a really massive response. And that's been helpful for me in ways I couldn't have predicted. I think it's really nice giving other people a boost. I mean, it's just silly things sometimes, like, oh, you know, that blouse, that colour really suits you. But it's also helped me appreciate individual beauty and look at other women differently and be less critical of myself as well. So it was just a little experiment I did, but it was actually a really nice thing to do. And I have to emphasise, none of those sort of self-help steps would have been enough on their own. I had to have the proper help first. But I think once I got to a certain point in my recovery, they were really necessary to keep me growing away from BDD. So I'm now 41. I haven't had any serious dysmorphic thoughts for years. I must be truthful, though, and say that BDD still echoes through my life. The trouble it caused me with relationships is probably the main reason I haven't had a family, which is a great sadness to me. And unlike some people with BDD, I was fortunate to be able to build a good career for myself. I know, you know, we're at different points on the spectrum, and I do know some people I've spoken to have trouble having a job, but for me that has been okay. But I suspect having BDD has held me back a bit in everything, really, including my career. But then I also think that what I've been through has made me more empathic towards other people, and probably generally a kinder, more sensitive person. I think it is important to look at those things. And I, you know, as I said at the beginning, I even have times now when I look in the mirror and feel quite pleased with what I see, which I think is amazing considering where I was. I think nobody who's been through BDD or ever loved anyone with it would underestimate what a huge leap that is. So, thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Charlotte.